Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the IOP Speaker Series event, Jane Fonda Talks Intergenerational Climate Action. My name is Chloe Thompson, and I'm a fourth year in the college majoring in public policy and environmental and urban studies. And I serve as the co-chair of Spectrum, the IOP's civic engagement group for LGBTQ+ students passionate about public service. It is an incredible honor to introduce this event tonight. First, because I'm a huge admirer of Jane Fonda's work, so much so that I wrote one of my college admissions essays about how she's my personal hero. And if you tried to tell 17-year-old me that I was here right now, she would not believe you. And second, because I'm currently working on my senior thesis project, which investigates the disproportionate impact of climate change on people aged 65 and older, with the goal of centering the lived experiences of older adults within environmental justice movements to facilitate intergenerational climate action that moves us towards a more age-friendly, climate-resilient future. With that in mind, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our guests, Jane Fonda, Tyler Massias, Jade Begay, and our moderator, Shannon Osaka. Jane Fonda's career spans across more than 6 decades in a variety of media, including but not limited to Broadway plays, films, TV series, and exercise videos. From her first arrest in 1970, which was ordered by the White House during her anti-Vietnam War speaking tour, to her most recent arrest in 2019 at a weekly climate protest she organizes with the nonprofit Greenpeace USA. She has held a steadfast commitment to using her influence in Hollywood to stand up to politicians, and these days the fossil fuel industry too, to push for urgent political action. Tyler Massias is an academic, farmer, organizer, and the Speakers Bureau Director at Earth Guardians, an intersectional environmental nonprofit that uses education, training, community building, and direct action to empower youth activists to be at the front lines of an anti-racist and anti-colonialist environmental movement. Jade Begay, Dene and Tasuki Pueblo, is an Indigenous rights activist, climate policy expert, filmmaker, and organizer. She formerly served as the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the NDN Collective, an Indigenous-led organization dedicated to building Indigenous power. In 2021, she was appointed by President Biden to serve on the first White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Shannon Osaka is a climate reporter for The Washington Post with a specialization in climate science, policy, and culture, and will serve as the moderator this evening. Before we begin, please remember to silence your cell phones. At the end of this discussion, there will be a brief opportunity to ask questions. If you have a question for the panelists, please remain seated, raise your hand, and keep an eye out for IOP staff with mics in the audience. And remember that first priority for questions is given to students. As we look forward to next quarter, please keep an eye out for our next Speaker Series events. All hail the Chief of Staff on March 19th, Night at the Coliseum, a history of political conventions in Chicago on March 20th, and Burning Tech, The Master Speaks, featuring Kara Swisher on March 21st. Visit politics.uchicago.edu for more information and registration. Lastly, a message from UCHI Votes. Early voting in the 2024 Illinois primary will be happening on campus the week of spring break. Stop by Reynolds Club on Wednesday, March 13th, Thursday, March 14th, or Friday, March 15th from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. to cast your vote. If you won't be on campus over spring break, Election Day is Tuesday, March 19th. Follow UCHI Votes on Instagram or go to uchivotes.com for more information. Thank you again for joining us, and please join me in giving a warm welcome to our guests.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Institute of Politics for having us, for hosting this event. I'm so honored to be here with Tyler, Jade, and Jane. And I want to start with the personal, and then we'll broaden out into thinking about climate action and politics more generally. And we will have time for a lot of audience questions at the end. So I want to start with you, Jane. You have been an activist. You've been an activist for so many causes in your life. You've marched against the Vietnam War, against the Iraq War. You fought for racial justice, for women's rights. How has your activism changed over the years? And is there anything different about activism, about climate change specifically?
Great question. Well, you know, we didn't have social media back then, right? Which meant that you had to organize. You had to really take time and build organizations from the ground up, build relationships and connections. Now you can pull off a demonstration very quickly, and that's good. But to create real social change, you have to build movements, and that takes time, and it takes personal connection. So those of us interested in social change, you know, I can't get over the fact there's a lot of gray hair here. Why is what I want to know. I mean, I think it's join the crowd. But, I mean, anyway, that's another thing. I'm just surprised that there's a lot of people who are no longer students, shall I say. And also I want to say I'm so excited to be here because talking to students is like one of the most important. I don't know who I'm talking to, frankly, because people look older than students. How many people in this room are students? Raise their hand. Well, okay, half and half. I'm so excited to talk to students. Also, the last time I was here, because I've spoken here before, I noticed there was a blackboard behind me with Barbarella showing Saturday night. So anyway, climate. I mean, organizing for against the climate crisis is, in the time that we've had social media to help us, it's like organizing anything. We have to start, you know, where people are and what their interests are, and who are you? Are you talking to someone that likes to ski? Take it from that point of view. Are you talking to someone who's a birder, who likes animals, who has grandchildren? You know, find out where people come from, and. Is this what we're talking about, how to organize? And listen. Listening when you're an organizer is way more important than what you say, because you have to find out who you're talking to and what their interests are, and then speak to those interests, especially when it comes to climate. Do you all agree with that?
We agree with that. We got you.
And young people can make all the difference in the world. You know, 70% of American people are concerned about the climate. And you know why? Because of students. Because in 2019, 6.5 million, mostly students worldwide, took to the streets. And it was the biggest global protest that's ever happened. And it changed a lot of minds. It really made people focus. And it all started with Greta Thunberg. That little 9-year-old inspired this, you know. Individuals can make a difference, but as I said to people that interviewed me a minute ago, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So always, no matter what it is you're organizing around, do it in concert with other people.
Thank you. I want to turn to Jade, and you've talked a little bit about how our discussion of climate change is so emissions focused. We're always thinking carbon, carbon, carbon. And you have talked about how that is not quite the right angle. Can you talk about what is the right angle and how Indigenous groups can help with that?
Yes, so I actually did a TED Talk on this, so I can only be so, I can be brief right now, but for 15 minutes of why I think this, go listen to that. I mean, building off what you were sharing, Jane, I think that, you know, when you come to community or when you're trying to build mobilization and mass movement behind the climate movement and build a base, when you're shouting out parts per million, that's not really like, that dramatic or grabbing. And so listening to people, listening to their needs, listening to what is the future that they want, getting away from this, what I referenced in the talk as carbon tunnel vision, and talking more to, again, our hopes, our dreams, how we want to, what makes us feel safe in this climate crisis? How do we achieve that? So again, listening. Yeah.
Thank you. And Tyler, I mean, we've talked a lot about young people. You are representing some young people on this panel today.
Right.
And I'm just curious, I mean, what you have seen in terms of youth activism in the past few years, how it has changed. And also, I want to hear a little bit about your agricultural background and how that informs your activism.
Right. So, I mean, definitely, I mean, in the past few years, it's actually a very interesting phenomena. I think many of us can remember, as some would call, the good old days before the COVID-19 pandemic hit and essentially altered, I mean, many of our lifestyles and how we went about doing certain things. I mean, organizing and, advocacy is no exception to that phenomena. So, I mean, here we are today. In my personal opinion, I just think it's very interesting. Times have changed to a degree where I feel that there are definitely distractions that are plaguing a lot of young people today. And so it's been a lot harder to connect, but also to find hope in a common cause. And I think a lot of that also has to do with mental health, right? As someone who's been studying environmental science and policy, and international relations as well, kind of really finding the intersections of that, I think it becomes really depressing and very, anxious-ridden, having to talk about very existential topics, and as a young person, really having that on your shoulders. So I think that the COVID-19 pandemic definitely did a really good job at further separating what already was a very disparate community within this nation and also throughout the world. However, that does not mean that there has not been efforts to negate that negative impact. So, I mean, for example, how did I get into farm work? Great question. It was actually through Twitter during the pandemic. So, me and my friends, we were really focused, I'll preface, when I was undergrad at American University, one of our big tasks was working with Black farmers in the DMV area and really providing for a pantry that we had within the school network for, essentially underserved students, especially when it comes to food needs. So we were able to actually, work with food banks around the DMV area, Black farmers, indigenous farmers, and, the DMV area to provide, food for these students. So that really developed into a beautiful relationship and network that I really formed with, these farmers and has lasted to this day. So I used to work with Marcus Robertson of Woodbox Farms down in Virginia. Now I work with the Ujamaa Cooperative Farming Alliance, which is the largest producer of heirloom seeds, multicultural heirloom seeds on the Eastern Shoreboard. And when I say heirloom, I mean, we're talking about, seeds that are really, really close to their genetic heritage, right? So we're talking about no genetic modification, no hybrid seeds. And you must ask yourself the question, well, who is in possession of seeds of that nature? Indigenous stewards and Black stewards, particularly in this country and the United States. I mean, I think that, the work that we're doing really contributes to the Black agrarian tradition, right? We're talking about a tradition that goes way back to the inception of this country. One could even say before 1776, when folks were, really working the land for cash crops, such as, rice, cotton, tobacco. And in my context, my family is from Jamaica. So, a big export of Jamaica was sugarcane. And as some of you may know, sugar, today, just as it was way back then, was pretty big in giving folks energy, right? That buzz to really boost the economic sectors of primarily Europe. And this is where we're starting to see the rise of the West, right? So, imperialism, colonialism, racism, these are topics that are not new to me or my culture, my people, my family. It is something that we often talk about. It's something that's, embedded in our music. Have you ever heard of Bob Marley? Have you listened to his lyrics? I think the Jamaican culture is very diverse in its recognition of those facts. And a lot of that has informed my advocacy and all that fun stuff. But I think that there's definitely a really big intersection here as well. I talk a lot about how agriculture bridges the gap between, Black and indigenous communities and has for centuries. I think this extends to a global movement of peoples that we're now seeing, local traditional peasant folks who are rising up against, rather suppressive and oppressive governments that do not work in favor of, low income, poor, disadvantaged people. And I think what we're starting to see is a change in the tide, and it's a good change. And a lot of this has been happening, like I said, despite circumstances such as the pandemic. But I also think, I mean, let's really get into the moves, or not the moves, I guess the ebbs and the flows of all of this. I'm going to bring it home to Palestine. Sorry, folks. I mean, we're really talking about a situation where we're seeing a genocide concurrently taking place, thousands of innocent children and women, elders, disabled folks, everyone you could imagine, ruthlessly losing their lives due to this brutal violence. But we're also seeing an ecocide taking place. I mean, take into account the fact that the IDF is putting seawater in the tunnels that they're finding underneath Gaza. Now, what is that? You know, what are the implications of an action such as that to agriculture in the region? We're talking about water infiltration, so we're talking about the infiltration of fresh groundwater resources. We're talking about, you know, how, I mean, such an action is influencing the salinity of soil. So, I mean, it's a complete and total blackout of, I mean, what I would call just the inherent urge of oppressed peoples to be resilient and to move past, you know, our struggles. I mean, I just think we can continue to go on with the examples, and I can bring it home to the United States with Black farmers. I'm sorry, I'm really rambling here. But we're talking about a situation where in the past century alone, Black farmers made up about 12% of the population. Well, guess what they make today? Someone guess. Virtually 3%. You know, for giggles, we'll just say 1%. It's virtually significant. We're talking about a lot of money that people have lost due to, you know, predatory loan practices. When we're talking about big financial institutions, we're talking about Jim Crow era laws, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I just think it's really important, once again, that we recognize that all of these, you know, these issues, these struggles for liberation, for independence are interconnected. Yeah. And the undergirding forces that inform these changes and these movements are love, are peace, compassion, community. And I think it's, you know, upon all of us to really take these lessons home and embrace them in our own activism. I'm not saying that activism or advocacy looks like one thing. All of us can contribute to this movement in our own unique, you know, niche way. And I think that takes a certain level of reflecting, but also engaging your community members and the people that you're, quite frankly, literally sitting right next to. So I'm going to end it on that note. I'm really sorry to go on for that long. But no, literally, I just lost my voice. So like, I'm really having a hard time talking. No, it's not funny, guys. It's not funny. On Saturday, literally on the Hands Off Rafah March in Washington, D.C., something that's been going on, not just, you know, in major cities throughout this country, but I mean, you know, throughout the world. And I mean, this is critical. So we're talking about really, and you know, I guess this is a question I've been facing myself. How can we radically, I'm sorry guys, how can we radically approach and engage with what is seemingly radically progressing issues that our global community is facing and that we're all ultimately impacted by? So, I mean, I leave that question with you guys. It's not an easy question to ponder upon, but once again, I ask that you do this in a cooperative fashion. I think that we need to break down this stereotype that we have to, you know, act as individuals, or that, you know, the whole world rests upon, you know, our shoulders. So, I mean, hey, we're here for each other, and it's important that we show that love and that we give each other that space and that time and that consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to jump on that last thing that you said about acting as individuals, and Jane also mentioned this. You go farther when you're together. Jane, we're talking about this sort of intergenerational activism, and you mentioned looking around and saying, okay, there's some older folks here, and there's a lot of students here. I mean, how do you think about that collaboration across generations? How do you make that as strong as it can be in order to push forward on climate action?
I think it's significant that Bill McKibben, one of the wonderful organizers in the climate movement, just a brilliant organizer, he's one of the founders of 350.org. His recent organization it's called, what is it called? It's
Third Act.
Third Act, taken from my memoir, by the way. You know, it's people over 50. So that, you know, we were going to plan, we were going to do a big demonstration in Washington a little while ago against the liquefied natural gas terminals, export terminals in the Bay Area, well, in the Gulf area, in Texas and Louisiana. And we were going to do it in rocking chairs in front of Congress. You know, us old folks rocking away. But Biden issued a pause. So there's no more, right now, no more LNG. That's why we have to get him elected so that he can make the pause permanent. But Bill's onto something. In 2018 and 2019, when Greta Thunberg was doing her vigil in front of the Swedish parliament, several times she said in press conferences, where are the old folks? We didn't create this mess, we young people. It's our future that's threatened. Why aren't older people coming to stand with us? And that personally, I accepted that and moved to DC for 5 months and got arrested every Friday. Because it was all to show Greta that we were, not really, but I wanted her to know that old people are, well, especially women. One of the things that I found out that was, well, I sort of thought it, but it was confirmed during the months that I spent in DC getting arrested. Every week, more and more people would come from all around the country, and mostly women, mostly with gray hair, and they'd never been to a rally before, never gotten arrested before. That's when you know you're getting somewhere, is when you get people who have never done it before to say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to put my body on the line. And it was mostly older women. I think older women what the hell do we have to lose, right? We're not in the market anymore. We've closed up shop, some of us anyway. And as Eve Ensler says in I don't know, how many of you have seen the vagina monologues? There's a wonderful, most of you haven't, well, you must. One of my favorite monologues is called The Flood. And this woman, she says, I've closed up shop due to flooding. Anyway, no, intergenerational, listen, we're all in this. If we do everything starting correctly, I just read this in a scientific paper. If we started doing everything right now, in 25 years, it would start to stabilize. Things would start to become normal. And I have a grandson that'll be 25 years old then, and that's worth fighting for, So that's called multi-generational concerns. I'm so happy that I'm here with younger people. You are younger, I can tell by looking at you. You're younger. Age doesn't really have to do with numbers. It's about whether you're healthy or not, right? If you're healthy, at 100, you can be quite thoughtful and incisive and important and involved. So we have to join together. Mm-hmm. And we have to listen to young people and not be patronizing just because we're older. Anyway, that's about all I'm going to say right now.
Jane mentioned this concept of putting your body on the line. And Tyler and Jade, I'm curious if you can talk about the power of that, the power of putting your body where your beliefs are and how that can push activism forward.
Sure. So I think, my trajectory of getting into the climate spaces, it was a journey. And actually, I was talking with someone in the hall earlier that I went to college in Chicago. I went to film school at Columbia College and was saying, your undergrad does not have to dictate your entire life, just for you students to know. But I started in film and documentary, and that brought me into covering front lines. I started doing some video journalism, and that brought me to various places in the country that were at the time, this was 2015, 2016, there were lots of pipeline fights going on, 2014, 15, 16. KXL for one, DAPL, those were two major pipeline fights that I covered very, very closely. I was also working with 350 as their multimedia producer for the global organization. So that brought me into various spaces where, we were covering a lot of these major fossil fuel fights, which, KXL, we won. DAPL, very much still ongoing, FYI. But I spent a good amount of time doing that work, being on the front lines, documenting, sharing the narratives and the stories from that place. But I also learned that it's really important to do the inside work. So now as, this title feels really wonky, but as like a political strategist, I see the value in both. And I see that both have to be working in concert to do what we're here to do, which is win. And I think we forget that sometimes, that we're not here to, virtue signal. We're not here to be like single individual champions and get that recognition. We're actually here to win. So what is gonna help us get there? It's all these things. It's showing up in mass movements and demonstrations, but it's also having our comrades in policy spaces, doing advocacy work, affecting the electoral work that's out there. So we need all of that happening all at once. All the tools, all the strategies, all the tactics.
Hear, hear.
Thanks.
I want to piggyback on that a little bit. And there's been this really long and amazing environmental protest history of pushing against things like the Dakota Access Pipeline or Keystone XL or Line 3 or CP2 in Louisiana, which Jane was just talking about. To Jade's point, I mean, what do you see as the responsibility of activists to work kind of inside the system, inside the policymaking system, and push for particular climate solutions, as well as pushing against fossil fuels? Jane, maybe I'll. Yes, yes, please.
Yeah, I really have come to believe, after participating in both, that it's going to take two efforts. An outside effort of unprecedented numbers of people willing to put their bodies on the line and protest. That's going to be critical. It's what history has never really changed in any important way, left the status quo without that, without huge numbers of people in the streets. And when I was in the streets in Chicago, no, I married somebody that's in the streets of Chicago. First time I ever came to Chicago was for the trial of Chicago 8 trial. Yeah, I married one of those guys. But I was in DC doing Fire Drill Friday, and Ed Markey, who was a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal, he's on the Senate subcommittee for climate change, and they invited me to speak to them, and I did, and I talked about what we were doing, and then I asked them, is this correct? Is this the strategy that we should be doing? And they all said, absolutely, build an army, build a big army. We have to get pressure coming from the outside. And that's what all good leaders will say. A perfect example is the Big Depression in the 30s, the Great Depression. Franklin Delano Roosevelt millions of people took to the streets. The unions were really strong then, and farmers and all kinds of people demanding things. And the ones that got into his office, they said, this is what we want. And Roosevelt said, I agree with you. Now go out and make me do it. So we need an outside strategy of millions and millions and millions of people, but we need an inside strategy. We have never been able to get the kind of legislation that's commensurate with what science is demanding. And I'm sorry, but it's talking about carbon. We have to stop new carbon development, fossil fuel development, and we have to phase out of, so that by the middle of the century, we're carbon free. We haven't been able to get it. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act is really good. It put a lot of money into the sustainability and all that, a lot of money into the fossil fuel development as well. The closest we got was Build Back Better. Do you remember that bill, the Build Back Better bill? We almost did it. There are too many oily Democrats elected to office who take money from the fossil fuel industry, and it kept what was good about Build Back Better from happening. And so a lot of people who've been in this a lot longer than I have and are much smarter than me decided that we needed to start a climate PAC, because if you can't change the people, change the people. Get rid of these people who will not pass good legislation. And that's why it's important to vote. I started the Jane Fonda Climate PAC for this reason. Mostly down ballot, because that's where climate stuff is happening now. The real important climate work is happening locally and statewide. City councils, state legislators, mayors, supervisors, public land commissioners. These are the people that really can make a difference. And they don't get money, and they don't get volunteers or media attention. So that is an inside-outside strategy. But we also need, it's a two-part strategy, like scissors. To win in climate, you need scissors. You need one blade to be about non-carbon, solar panels, electric vehicles, all the, the green sustainable future. That's one blade, and the other blade has to be, getting rid of fossil fuels. Not right away turning the spigot off, but phasing out and stopping any new development. And you know something, I had cancer recently, and I started doing research into there's a cancer epidemic happening. And what I found out was the fossil fuel folks, they're not just killing the planet and all sentient beings, but they're killing us. They're causing a health crisis. And I'm not going to bore you all by giving you a lot of figures right now, but 1 in 5 people who die in the world every year die because of fossil fuel air pollution, fossil fuel related air pollution. I mean, we are dying because of fossil fuels. So there's a lot of urgency, and we don't have a lot of time left. So it's inside, outside, 2 blades. Mm-hmm.
To be clear, though, the carbon piece I was talking about earlier, it is so that we can achieve climate justice. Because when we make it about numbers, when we make it about just counting carbon, that's when these fossil fuel companies can get away with carbon removal and carbon credits.
And plastic.
And plastic, which we know are all false solutions. So when we start talking about people's needs and justice in boardrooms of major companies like fossil fuel industry or major corporations, when we start talking about health and safety, then it becomes about justice. Just to make that clear.
Well, let's talk about the fossil fuel industry, because there's a lot there. I mean, I think there's sort of 2 framings to think about the climate crisis, right? There's the one framing that we faced a lot maybe 20 years ago that was, well, everyone's doing it, everyone's driving their car and turning on the lights. You have to think about your own personal carbon footprint, which we all heard way too much about. And then there's the fact that the fossil fuel industry has obfuscated the science, blocked progress on policy. How much blame do you all put at the foot of the fossil fuel industry? And how can collective action work against that industry?
100%. Yeah. No, I mean, they're criminals. They have to be rendered, like nobody here would date, none of you would date a tobacco company executive. In the 60s, it was girls say yes to boys who say no. Let's just not. I know that you all have been tempted to sleep with Jamie Dimon and the guy that Rex Tillerson. Can you believe we had a president that made the head of the CEO of ExxonMobil Secretary of State? We cannot allow this to happen again, folks. I mean, the world, we are the first, all young and old, we are the first living generation to experience the climate crisis. And we are the last generation that can do anything about it. So let's put all the blame right now on, agriculture plays a huge role in it.
That's right.
But not as much a big hole as, but also fossil fuels has invaded agriculture.
They have.
Yeah.
In fact, I would add, Jane, there's a reciprocal relationship here, right? So we're talking about how climate
Could you talk
change,
a little louder?
Yeah, of course. We're talking about, let me actually move in since we're, having a conversation. Sorry, guys. But yeah, we're talking about how climate change, is a detriment, or at least, the symptoms of climate change is a detriment to the state of agriculture, and how, highly industrialized and, Mechanized agricultural activities are some of the largest contributors to climate change. Plus, we're talking about the transportation element of that. I'm sorry, I got a lot of information I'm trying to get out. Sorry, guys. Are you guys catching up with me? We're good? Okay, good.
I'm the only one.
It's okay, Jane, I got you.
Okay, you can tell me later.
Yes, no, of course. So, I mean, we're also seeing, this relationship as well. And we're talking about the piece about mobilization. This goes back to what I was saying earlier as well. And we're talking about local indigenous traditional, people really organizing around this issue. We're talking about essentially the corporate takeover of globalized food systems. We're talking about globalization, and then we're also talking about the vestiges, the detrimental vestiges that has on farmers all around the world. We're seeing protests in Spain, France, India, here in the United States, the list goes on. So, I mean, as much as we, I understand the importance of fossil fuels, I think we definitely need to develop a very much so holistic perspective on the issues at hand, as this is a holistic challenge, right? So we can come about this from multiple angles. I can talk about the Black agrarian tradition in farming. You can talk about, indigenous rights and sovereignty and land back. You can talk about the fossil fuel industry and the contributions that they have to the detriment of this planet and our climate. Also, the communities that inhabit it is also an essential piece. So carbon isn't, the end all be all. Let's also talk about the communities that are at the end of that as well, and the ecosystem services, right? That they feed off of and that they feed into. Once again, we're talking about regeneration. It's so much more than that. And it's a beautiful picture that all of our collective work can also paint within this movement as well.
I'm not sure I heard all of what you said.
Sorry, guys.
But it sounded really smart. I'm intimidated. But
no, don't be intimidated. No.
I know you'll agree with this, both of you. One of the important things that I discovered doing Fire Drill Fridays in 2020 after George Floyd was murdered, and we had a lot of Black guests on, I realized that if there was no racism, if there was no patriarchy, there'd be no climate crisis. Climate crisis is like a Russian nesting doll. As you take it apart, you come upon all the other problems. It's a mindset. White settlers arrive on the shores of this country and they see forests and they think flooring and boats and doors. Let's cut it down. And oh my God, all this land is here. We've got to bring people over from another country to farm the land for us and make money. And we have to say that they're not human, because if they're human, then we can't call ourselves a democracy, and we have to call ourselves a democracy. So we'll make them slaves. I mean, it all starts with a mindset that's hierarchical. Certain people, white men, are at the top. Obviously, there's a lot of very good white men in this room, however. I don't mean to, but generally speaking, white men have ruled. And then down the line, with nature at the bottom, we've become so alienated from nature. And that's why it's important that we listen to indigenous voices. And I have been following and working with indigenous people since 1970 when I visited Alcatraz. And one of the things that for all kinds of reasons, you have maintained connection to the land because you see that it's not separate from us. And we can learn from indigenous people how to reconnect with nature. Yes.
Yeah, yes, connection and interdependence is definitely key. And I think there's more to, it's a worldview. And I think you mentioned the patriarchy and what was the other one? Racism. And I think, that also kind of stems from systematic colonization that happened in other continents prior to here. So I think colonization being that kind of overarching monster that then breeded these other forces, if you will.
I think we have time for one more question from me. So I'm going to try to smush a few different questions into one and say, we're talking about all of these interlinking problems: climate change, racial justice, social justice. It is so, at some level, it's so intimidating to look at trying to fix all of these problems at once. At the same time, we're rapidly approaching 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. We've passed it in the last 12 months, as Jane points out. I mean, where do each of you find hope and energy to continue in this work against all of that? Tyler, do you want to start?
Absolutely. Yes, so this definitely goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? About, the responsibility is on all of us as a collective. So everyone who took the time, the space, the energy, the consideration to actually be here. Kudos to you, congratulations to you. That's the first step. Like I said, next is really strategizing, is really being coordinated, is really organizing. And I think we're really seeing similarities to, the civil rights era and the anti-war movements of the 70s as well, right? Of this resurgence of this, of just like youth power and energy, this momentum that we just haven't seen before. And for me right now, I can definitely say, the very reason I lost my voice, so I'm really having trouble speaking today. I'm sorry to go back to this again, is Palestine. And Jane, I would love to connect this to, your work with fossil fuels. We're talking about on October 30th of last year, Bibi Netanyahu approving 12 permits or licenses to major fossil fuel corporations, particularly, I believe, UK's BP and Italy's, one of Italy's natural gas companies. We're talking about a natural gas or a series of natural gas deposits worth approximately $500 billion. So now let's talk about the climate security nexus, right? So how conflict and climate and environmental issues are inextricably linked. And the same thing we can say about food issues, right? And we can talk about farming, we can talk about land back. So I really think that it's just important that all of us are moving forward with the level of integrity and humanity and compassion that simply has not, been seen on the face of this earth before. I think there's a new day, a dawn actually, aging upon us of liberation and resistance that we have not seen from almost, a century to half of a century. So I think now is the time to act. Now is the time to move forward. Now is the time to collaborate. I think we've done enough reflecting to some degree. I think we can all, really just chime into ourselves, close our eyes, and really get aligned with our moral compass, our ethical values. Really think on these things and to think critically. Not to believe, and we were talking about greenwashing earlier, right? Not to believe everything that's being told to you. You must self-determine your own futures. We must be willing and able to imagine. And I know it's scary. The unknown is a terrifying thing. But unless we are courageous enough and brave enough to imagine the equitable and just future that we want for all of us to live in happily, then it's simply not going to happen. So please be each other's spark, be each other's catalyst, really work on this together because like I said, we're going through some things. We're going through hard times and we're really not focusing on what's going on, inside, in our spirits and our hearts and our bodies, our psyche. Literally, we're going through so much trauma and there's no grace to heal. Look at how quickly we've gotten over COVID. We're acting like it wasn't even a thing. Where's the memorial to all those who died? Where's the recognition? I just think we're constantly desensitized to what's happening today. So I think it's just so important that we are aware and that we're considerate. So I really hope that those closing messages resonate with a lot of you and that you go forward and do what you need to do. Yeah, thank you guys. We're in this together, okay?
Well, shout out to the organizers of this panel because I feel like we're really riffing off each other. This is a good crew. I think what is giving me hope or keeping me energized and inspired during this extremely mysterious and transitional time is, and riffing off of what you were talking about, is this, renaissance of indigenous leadership, which I am so lucky to be a part of and be growing and evolving with, right? And yes, there's the beautiful cosmologies and cultures of, and the strength of that, which I'm also blessed to come from and to be connected to, that just keeps me so grounded and so strong in this work and so clear. I have because of that connection, because of my identity, I'm able to really know why I do this work. And also, it's not just the connection to nature or the connection to community, it's also just the brilliance of technology and the brilliance of indigenous ingenuity. I'm like, indigenuity, something there. But yeah, traditional
Ingenuity.
Yes. I think we're onto something. But yeah, this rise of traditional ecological knowledge in policy. I mean, it's amazing to see. Like, I think it was mentioned in my bio, I serve on a White House council. It's amazing to see that there's actual proclamation leading federal agencies on how to interpret and understand Indigenous knowledge in policy making, in regulation, which then determines, and has impacts on how we permit for fossil fuels or how we, address this major transition to electric vehicle or EVs or electrification. And then, I get to work at the grassroots level where I see Indigenous technology and knowledge just totally shifting local economies and local regions, from revitalizing the buffalo and creating an entire new economy, or revitalize, I should say, economy around that. That's happening in the plains, or people in Alaska doing beautiful work around kelp growing, which is pulling carbon and creating jobs and all this amazing stuff. Also creating like great livelihoods for people, And then there's the leadership part. You were talking about healing. I'm so inspired every day and so provided with hope by the leadership that exists, that from the Indigenous leadership that exists in this country right now. And I don't take that for granted. I don't take for granted that we have Deb Haaland 9th in line for president, I mean, and that beautiful imprint that she's had on every part of government at this point. We have the highest rates of Indigenous people running for electoral office. We have, young leaders coming in and advising policymakers and companies and just having a really great impact and doing it, yes, embedding our Indigenous knowledge, but also coming from a place of healing and coming from a place, there's a quote that I really love, or quote sentiment, that Indigenous peoples have already survived genocides. We've already survived apocalypses. And we're not here to seek revenge. We're here to heal so that we can continue to live in this kind of harmony. And I see that every day, and that's what makes me keep doing this.
Really close. Greta Thunberg said, you gotta love autism. No, she didn't say that, but I'm just saying, she's autistic. Okay, you know that. She's on the spectrum, which is what gives her the power. She calls her autism her superpower. But she said, everybody goes looking for hope. Look for action, and hope will come. And I know that in my bones. If you take action, despair will go away. So I join with my two younger colleagues to call you to action.
Thank you. Looks like we have a question over here.
Hi, thank you so much. My name's Daisy and I'm a 4th year in the college. And I guess since we're here at a university, I'm sort of wondering what you imagine the link or the role of the academic in all of this to be. I think sometimes I wonder what happens to the knowledge we're producing here and how we're disseminating it. And, from personal experience going into communities and trying to express what's happening and how it's a social justice, but also an environmental issue, and then trying to say there's a scientific paper. It can be hard to sort of all explain. And so I'm wondering what you see as the connection there between the scientific and the public.
I think
Why don't you answer that?
I'll go. So one way, let's see, I'm trying to connect this. In my talk, in the TED Talk, there's, I'm like, okay, so we need to get away from, this high level carbon counting thing in order to bring more justice into the picture. And one of those ways I talk about is to invest into research. Indigenous communities in particular need academia, not as, the people doing stuff about us, but doing stuff with us, creating research, creating papers, creating data with us. There has not ever been an Indigenous national climate survey until now, and I get to lead that. And I'm working on that set of data with a team actually at Northwestern, and that data is going to be so valuable to our advocacy. It's going to help us push elected leaders to understand how important this issue is to our people. It's going to be a huge tool for advancing our rights and also our lived experience. So I think that especially now, you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, where I think universities are able to absorb some of those grants as technical assistance. We need people helping us, build out climate plans, build out adaptation plans. We need data, we need research. But again, we don't need you doing that work on behalf of us. We need to be partners from the very beginning.
One over here.
Hi there, I'm Alexis Paredes. I'm a fourth year at the college studying political science. And I know that all three of you come from very different backgrounds, and very eloquently, Jane, you put that you should see where people come from. And I kind of wanted to hear your guys' perspectives further on the topic of racism and sexism being kind of at the core of climate change, and how you reckon with intersectionality within the conversation we're having.
Who wants to go first?
I could definitely go. As I've brought up earlier before, racism is an integral part. Guys, I know, racial justice, I'm sure this is a term that some of you are familiar with, right? Yeah, so a big part of that is really talking about, the discrepancies in, the impact that we see, such things like, industrialization, for instance, or redlining, common historical phenomena, where we're seeing non-white folks essentially really suffering not only the brunt of the symptoms or impacts of climate change, but we're also talking about environmental degradation too, right? So we're talking about air pollution, water pollution, the list goes on. And we're also talking about, misogyny. A lot of women around this planet are tasked with a very, very common thing, such as rain and water collection. In instances where infrastructure isn't necessarily applicable. One thing that you really must ask yourself, in a question like this, is, what are the impacts of climate change now on the roles that women have in actually providing for themselves and their families and their communities? And I can assure you that it's not a pretty picture. So the intersections are real. They definitely exist. And this goes back to what I was saying, earlier with you, Jane, in our conversation. We really need to have a holistic issue when we're talking about these environmental crises, essentially. So we're talking about a collection of crises. So yes, intersections are absolutely imperative. And once again, I think we need to be very diligent, do our due diligence, become very aware to, once again, the issues that we're handling, and being holistic and creative in the process in terms of how we're coming up with solutions and working together, right? We cannot achieve a just world by ourselves. How many of you have tried doing that? And how many of you have succeeded? So I think that speaks for itself. But yeah.
And I think just one last thing on that. I think okay, there we go. We need to be connecting right now the attack on reproductive rights and our rights to bodily autonomy to the climate crisis. To your point, mothers, women are the main providers in most communities across the globe. And if we're being attacked to have that self-determination on our bodies, that's going to have a huge impact, as also women are the main actors and leaders in the climate space. And so, I think the intersections are there, the connections are there. We need to be watching this very closely considering how that is going to mobilize us this year.
Research has shown that women are the last to be rescued after extreme weather events. They're the most affected by climate change. Following extreme weather events all over the world, I'm thinking of the Philippines after the cyclones, men wait in the refugee camps to rape women. Sexual attacks increase exponentially when there is an extreme climate disaster. I was recently in North Texas in the Permian, which overlaps into New Mexico, in Pecos and Midland, northern eastern Texas. They're the man camps. Thousands of men get brought in when there's drilling. And especially when it's in an indigenous place, indigenous women disappear. By the hundreds are not found yet. And I saw these man camps, and the sheriff in I probably shouldn't even say this, but in that area, I just won't get specific, doesn't like the oil companies. And it was the first time I heard that an elected official in Texas doesn't like the oil companies. He doesn't because it brings in vice. What does that mean, I asked. Women are brought in by the busload, some of them imported from Mexico across the border. No passports, no money, and they're left there at the mercy of these workers who are underpaid and overworked, mandatory overtime. It's the most dangerous industry job of any. They die all the time working with these methane tanks, and women are sacrificed to them, especially indigenous women. Anyway, that's an example that I don't think we're aware enough about how women are impacted by all this stuff.
We have one over here.
Hello, everyone. I'm a little nervous. Can everyone not look at me?
What did she say?
Hi,
"Don't look
Tyler.
at me,
Hi,
I'm
Jade.
nervous."
Hi, Jane. Hello. So my name is Kiara O'Shea. I'm a realtor here in the Chicagoland area, and I'm from a small town in Louisiana that is very much so affected by climate change. My question is to all of you. It's a two-parter, so forgive me. How do you pay respect to your trauma while still being effective in the movement? Number one. And number two, how do you explain your life's imprint on climate change to those who believe differently than you?
I'm just going to repeat the question. So the first part of the question was, how do you process your trauma? Tell me if I'm getting it. How do you process your trauma from climate change while continuing to move forward? And then the second half of the question was, how do you talk about climate change with those who have different opinions than you? Is that right? Jane, do you want to start?
Well, I'll tell you how I did it. I remembered it was when there were all those terrible wildfires in California. I live in Los Angeles. The sky was apocalyptic. It was orange, brown. It was 112 degrees, and I read that birds were falling dead out of the sky. And I was traumatized. I really went down a rabbit hole until and then I read Naomi Klein's book On Fire, and it hit me like a bolt, and I started Fire Drill Friday in DC. So the way to move on is to move on from climate trauma, is to do something about it. When you are 100% fully with your whole body engaged, and you're doing all you can, you aren't going to be depressed. That's the answer to that question, action.
And then how do you talk with people who have different beliefs about climate change than you do?
Why doesn't one of you answer that?
I'm just like, let's go. Like, I just like, knowledge is power. I travel a lot for my work, and I'm a nerd. I like learning all the things to know about this, whether it's from the industry side or the economic side or the city planning side or the tax side. Did you know that there's a tax side to climate? Yeah. And so when I sit next to a person in the airplane, that's often how these conversations happen. And I share a little bit about what I do. I don't know, I try to play that game, but of like, they ask, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, here we go. But if they push back, I'm like, okay, let's get into this. So I just really try to, really know what I'm talking about, and of course, like, again, back to the very, very beginning point, like, meet people where they're at or from. And so if I'm talking to, someone from Louisiana, yeah, luckily I have some knowledge about that place, and I'll make references and jokes, and yeah, it's about making the conversation fun, but also trying to push people, because I don't think people really expect that, especially from a little lady like me. So
just have one really short story. I do a lot of canvassing, and I was canvassing in San Diego, California, which is kind of Republican. We're changing that, but it has been. And I came to the door of a woman who had Trump signs on her lawn, and always, God, you open the door and you can hear Fox News coming from the living room. And she talked about how come she, 100% for Trump. He understands me, my kind of guy. She's a single woman. Her mother was living with her, ill, no jobs. She has a son with a precondition. And, I listened. And then what you want to do is you want to tell them something they don't know. And what I said, the only thing I said, do you realize that if Trump is elected, that your son will lose his insurance coverage because there's no coverage for preconditions? And you could see her stop breathing. And you could see the doubt manifest in her face. You probably experienced it too. And she took down the Trump signs. And I don't know how she ended up voting, but tell people what they don't know after you've listened for an hour. And please understand, I'm sure you two agree with this, we don't need everyone. One of the things you learn when you're canvassing is, and you learn it really quick, that there are some people you could forget it, right? I mean, there's just no, I don't call them bad names. You try to, bad behavior and bad voting records, that's the language of the traumatized. And you can hate the behavior, but don't hate the people. I don't hate Trump. I feel sorry for the trauma that has caused him to behave the way he does. So, anyway, I think I said it, yeah.
I think we have one here.
Yeah.
Do I have this right? Okay, fantastic. Hi, my name is Audrey Scott. I'm also a fourth year in the college. I'm studying astrophysics and anthropology. And first, I want to say thank you for this space that we've all been able to create together. I've really connected with the things that you have said and the questions that other people have asked as well. So I'm from Houston, which is paradoxically incredibly impacted by climate change and also a major US center of the fossil fuel industry. And something that I like to think about is, we focus on this kind of organizing, but what sort of equitable futures do we want to create? And in a course that I'm taking right now at the university, we've been discussing climate change in the context of existential risks, and a potential solution being something more along the lines of things like nuclear energy. And the China syndrome was something that specifically came up as a part of our coursework and discussing opposition to that. So from all of your perspectives, I was wondering, do you see an equitable path forward with things like nuclear energy? And if not, given the innate trade-offs that are kind of a part of every form of non-fossil fuel energy, what is your future that you want to help create as we organize ourselves?
I could answer on this one. I would say really quickly, but I don't know how true that would be. But I'll try my best. I just think that's such a good question. I think I'm a traditionalist at heart when it comes to a lot of things, ecological or environmental. I'm always like, where'd she go? But she's right there. I think especially when it comes to green technologies, I think we really need to be real with ourselves and the implications that the production of these technologies has, but also when they're operational, how does this impact planet? How does this impact communities? And I just don't think that reflection is there. I don't even know if the research and development is there for many of the companies that are proposing these technologies. But there is a proverb in the Akan language of the Ghanaian people, and it's called Sankofa. And loosely what that translates to is how we can pull on past wisdoms and knowledge to inform the generation of a more just and equitable future for us all. So I think it's so funny. I really am a hater when it comes to a lot of, and I used to be so big on that when I was younger. I was like, technology will save the planet. I am totally not that today. I think, like I said, deep reflection is 100% necessary, but this goes back to what we're talking about with indigenous wisdoms as well, right? And this also goes back to, wisdoms found in the Black agrarian tradition and the connections that we have, especially that I have as a farmer, working with people who are a lot older than me. I'm learning these wisdoms such as seed keeping or, crop rotation. The list goes on. And these things, yes, they're great for the land, but they also contribute to, the mitigation of climate change. We're talking about these, sequestering carbon. So these techniques, these methodologies, dare I say Afro-Indigenous or just African and Indigenous, are quite frankly the solutions to many of the problems that we face. So the question we must ask ourselves is, are we willing to step aside? And I know who some of y'all may, who need to do the stepping asiding, and really allow others who, are not necessarily able to leverage their voice to create the change that they want to do so. And once again, that takes a certain level of, humility and gratitude as well. And someone brought up the whole element of healing in this space. Really practicing gratitude has helped me overcome a lot of just like the anxiety that I face doing this work. Like, I know at times you can feel so helpless and so anxious, but simply taking up the time out of your day to be thankful for the air that you're breathing and for the land that you're walking on, even the food that you're eating. Things are so disparate, we're not really even thinking about how food gets to our table, how, the Chipotle that we're eating gets to that counter and into my bag and into my apartment. It's a very long process and a lot of people are impacted. So once again, I ask everyone to really use your minds and to think critically. I think we're coming into times when truth is in question. And a lot of people are very, very skeptical about very simple and basic facts. So when we go back to, well, how do we talk to people who have opposing views on this? Jane, you said, well, not everybody needs to be convinced. That's 100% correct. I'm sorry, but not everyone needs to be convinced. And I honestly would recommend that you not waste your time doing that. However, yes, you can have a productive and eloquent and considerate conversation with someone that doesn't agree with you. That's necessary. We live in times when politics are so polarized, the left, the right, the Democrats, the Republicans. It's so foolish. I honestly don't understand how anyone, amongst any political line wouldn't support protecting their only home, their only planet, the great commons, our water, our air, our land, our seed. That's ridiculous. This is our sacred reality and we must tend to it.
Even dogs don't poop in their own kennel. We're stupider than dogs.
No.
Keep electing Lena Hidalgo in Houston. She's got a climate plan.
All right,
And one thing,
yeah.
and just one more thing on the question. No political leader is going to say this, but I can, and that's this idea of degrowth. I know we're not blaming consumers, we're not blaming individuals for the climate crisis. That's not what I'm saying, but we do set trends, right? And we do have a role, and we can use our dollars in effective ways. One of our best powers as individuals, as citizens, is boycotting. Who here has made a climate commitment? Nice, Jane. Yeah, I see a few hands. Okay, so I'm going to share my climate commitment, my two big ones. This year, they're kind of cheesy, but I decided at the beginning of this year I'm not going to buy any new clothes. Pretty petty, but important.
Yeah.
No consuming of clothes. Okay, so there's that. And then my big one is that I'm giving up flying by plane by the time I turn 35. So that's, I'm not going to reveal my age.
Why not? I did.
That's coming up soon. It's coming up soon.
Okay.
You'll know. There will be signs. I think we need to take on these types of commitments. We need to be bold. We need to just kind of face the reality. Like our Mother Earth can't handle all of this consumption, and we need to adjust. It's not our fault, but we need to make some changes. We can't keep being comfortable in the ways that we've been comfortable because of fossil fuels. And so whatever the energy shift is going to be, whether it's hopefully like solar, more renewables, but also what about just driving down our energy use? And what does that look like?
All right, I think we have time to squeak in one more question. So let's do it and we'll answer really fast.
Hello, my name is Oliver. I'm a first year at the college studying environment, geography, and urbanization. My question is sort of going off what you, especially Jane, have already said about electoral politics. So for Jade and for Tyler, what do you think is the relationship between institutional change and grassroots action? And for all of you, what is your call to action for people of any age looking to get involved in climate activism?
Lightning round.
Yeah, lightning round. Let's go, Tyler.
I don't understand the question. What is the question?
The first part of the question was for Jade and Tyler, and then the last part of the question will be for all of you, which was just, what's your call to action?
Hello? Oh, I was like, I could definitely start. I feel like it's not picking up my voice really well. Are we good? Okay, cool, thank you. So yes, definitely on the institutional scale and also with grassroots mobilization, we've seen movements like the Sunrise Movement and the Green New Deal really being broached and being propelled by a lot of young people today. So I think just continuing that trend and really putting the pressure on policymakers, but also, as Jane has pointed out earlier, electing the people who are willing to do the work. Simple as that. And I feel like I understand that it's so helpless sometimes. You feel like we're in a situation where it's like, well, I don't like this candidate and I don't like this one either, so now I don't know what to do. Maybe I'm just going to choose the lesser of two evils. But once again, are we willing to imagine a new future, to do something different? I can assure you that, and I'm pretty sure this is the definition of insanity by Einstein, right? Perpetually doing the same thing and expecting a different result. I mean, change it up. And I think that's what we're demanding. We're demanding systemic transformation. We're already seeing transformation on the grassroots scale. So there needs to be that sync. There needs to be that link. And I'm sorry, but I forgot the call of action part. That was the second part of the question. I think we've already established that. Just think critically, be aware, always be a student, always be willing to learn. You never know too much. Life is a long journey, it's short and you never know when tomorrow is going to be your last day. So please be grateful,
and
practice
get this
gratitude.
school out of fossil fuels.
That too. Disinvest.
And those of us older folks here, be sure that the banks that you bank in don't invest in fossil fuels. Make sure that your city isn't make sure that everything that you're connected with gets out of fossil fuels. And you can sleep with the workers, it's not their fault, but don't sleep with the executive. It's called a pussy boycott. We gotta have fun while we're doing it, okay? No more sleeping with fossil fuel people. And don't marry anybody that likes fossil fuels.
Jade, do you want to do a quick call to action?
Sure, and just on the institutional kind of systemic change or transformation, I mean, I hope in this room with all these students in this department that we have some of our next leaders, political leaders, corporate business leaders. We said earlier that climate crisis is born from the dual evils of patriarchy and racism and colonization, but also the climate crisis is here because of leadership failure and a leadership crisis. And so we're still in a leadership crisis, I would say. So I just, I guess, call to action as well, swiftly transitioning into that. Just stay on track. We need leaders. We need strong leaders. Older folks mentor these new leaders. We need to be trained in how to run boards and how to run companies. Take us under your wing. Help us begin to lead this new way, and also make a bold climate commitment. Every one of you, I want to see a bold climate action.
And when you vote with climate in your heart, and don't sit it out. This is no year for protest voting. There's too much at stake.
Thank you, everyone. Let's do a round of applause for our amazing panelists.